Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 6 of our reading of Never Before in Paperback, Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous. And in this part, we'll probably finish off The Man with the Copper Fingers by Dorothy L. Sayers. But before we do that, we're going to go over the copyright information, which clearly says he's giving special thanks to. I should have this memorized by now. Oh, that's the acknowledgments. Okay, let me just. The author gratefully acknowledges the invaluable assistance of Robert Arthur in the preparation of this volume. This should give you all the information that you need if you're interested in this kind of stuff, all the different printings. Now, I'll leave this here for a little bit longer, and then we'll get into the acknowledgments. Anyways, in the last part, Varden was telling a story about Loader, who was this metal worker. He made sculptures, apparently. But it seems like he electroplated. He was jealous, thought that his live-in woman was having an affair or something. So he turned her into a statue, apparently. And apparently this other guy was there, and basically we're going to find out more about that. So we're going to continue, and I'm going to have the acknowledgments on the screen while I read this. I waited till I was sure he had gone, and then got up. Uncommonly quiet, I may say. I tiptoed over to the easel to see what the fascinating work of art was. I saw at once it was designed for the figure of the sleeping athlete, and so I looked at it and felt a sort of horrid conviction stealing over me. It was an idea which seemed to begin with it in the stomach and work its way to the roots of my hair. My family says I'm too inquisitive. I can only say that wild horses wouldn't have kept me from investigating that cupboard, with the feeling that something absolutely vile might hop out at me. I was a bit wrought up, and it was a rotten time of night. I put a heroic hand on the doorknob. To my astonishment, the thing wasn't even locked. It opened at once to show a range of perfectly innocent and orderly shelves that would probably have held, which wouldn't possibly have held Loader. My blood was up, by this time, so I hunted around for the spring lock, which I knew must exist, and found it without much difficulty. The back of the cupboard swung noisily inward, and I found myself at the top of a narrow flight of stairs. I had the sense to stop and see that the door could be opened from the inside before I went any further, and I also selected a good stout pestle, which I found on the shelves, as a weapon in case of accident. Then I closed the door and tripped with elf-like lightness down the jolly old staircase. There was another door. There was another door at the bottom, but it didn't take me long to fathom the secret of that. Feeling frightfully excited, I threw it boldly open, with the pestle ready for action. However, the room seemed to be empty. My torch caught the gleam of something liquid, and then I found the wall switch. I saw a biggish square room fitted up as a workshop. On the right hand wall was a big switchboard with a bench beneath it. From the middle of the ceiling hung a great floodlight illuminating a glass vat filled 7 feet long, fully 7 feet long and about 3 feet wide. I turned on the floodlight and looked down into the vat. It was filled with a dark brown liquid, which I recognized as the usual compound of cyanide and copper sulfate, which was used for copper plating. The rods hung over it with their hooks all empty, but there was a packing case half open at one side of the room, and pulling the cover aside, I could see rows of copper anodes, enough of them to put a plating over a quarter of an inch thick on a life-size figure. There was a smaller case still nailed up, which, for its weight and appearance, I guess contained the silver for the rest of the process. There was something else I was looking for, and I soon found it. Considerable quantities of prepared graphite and a big jar of varnish. Of course, there was no evidence really of anything being on the cross. There was no reason why Loader shouldn't make a plaster cast, and Sheffield played it if he had the fancy for that kind of thing. But then I found something that couldn't have come there legitimately. On the bench was an oval slab of copper about an inch and a half long. Loader's night's work, I guess. It was an electrotype of the American consular seal, and the thing they stamp on your passport photograph to keep you from hiking it off and substituting the picture of your friend, Mr. Jiggs. So, who would like to get out of the country because he is so popular with Scotland Yard. I sat down on Loader's stool and worked out that pretty little plot in all its details. I could see it as turned on three things. First of all, I must find out if Varden was proposing to make tracks shortly for Australia, because if he wasn't, it threw all my beautiful theories out. And secondly, it would help matters greatly if he happened to have dark hair like Loader's, as he has, you see, near enough anyway to fit the description on a passport. I'd only seen him in the Apollo Belvedere thing, and with a fair wig on, but I knew if I hung about, I should see him presently when he came to stay with Loader. And thirdly, of course, I had to discover if Loader was likely to have any grounds for a grudge against Varden. Well, I figured out I'd stay down in that room about as long as was healthy. Loader might come back at any moment, and I didn't forget that a vat full of copper sulfate and cyanide of potassium would be a highly handy means to get rid of a too inquisitive guest, and I can't say I had any great fancy for figuring as part of Loader's domestic furniture. I've always hated things made in the shape of in the shape of things. Loader's furniture. Of things, volumes of Dickens that turned out to be a biscuit tin, and dodges like that. And though I take no overwhelming interest in my own funeral, I like it to be in good taste. I went so far as to wipe away my finger marks I might have left behind me, and then I went back to the studio and rearranged that divan. I didn't feel Loader would care to think I'd been down there. There was just one other thing I felt inquisitive about. I tiptoed back through the hall and into the smoking room. The silver couch glimmered in the light of the torch. I felt I disliked it 50 times more than ever before. However, I pulled myself together and took a careful look at the feet of the figure. I'd heard all about the second toe of Maria Morano's. I passed the rest of the night in the armchair. After all, what with Mrs. Bilt's job, and one thing and another, and the inquiries I had to make, I had to put off my interference in Loader's little game till rather late. I found out that Varden had been staying with Loader a few months before the beautiful Maria Morano had vanished. I'm afraid I was rather stupid about that, Mr. Varden. I thought perhaps there had been something. Don't apologize, said Varden, with a little laugh. Cinema actors are notoriously immoral. Why rub it in? said Whimsy, a trifle hurt. I apologize anyway. It came to the same thing as far as Loader was concerned. Then there was one bit of evidence I had to get. To be absolutely certain, electroplating, especially such a ticklish job as the one I had in mind, wasn't a job that could be finished in a night. On the other hand, it seemed necessary that Mr. Varden should be seen alive in New York up to the day he was scheduled to depart. It was also clear that Loder meant to be able to prove that a Mr. Varden had left New York all right, according to plan, and had actually arrived in Sydney. Accordingly, a false Mr. Varden was to depart with Varden's papers and Varden's passport, furnished with a new photograph duly stamped with the consular stamp, and to disappear quietly at Sydney and be retransformed into Mr. Eric Loder, traveling with a perfectly regular passport of his own. Well then, in that case, obviously, a cablegram would have been sent off to Misto Films Limited, warning them to expect Varden by a later boat than he had arranged. I handed over this part of the job to my man Bunter, who is uncommonly capable. The devoted fellow shadowed Loder faithfully for getting on for 3 weeks, and at length, the very day before Mr. Varden was due to depart, the cablegram was sent from an office in Broadway, where by a happy providence, once more, they supply extremely hard pencils. By Jove, cried Varden, I remember being told something about a cablegram when I got out, but I never connected it with Loder. I thought it was just some stupidity of the telegraph people. Quite so. Well, as soon as I'd get that, I popped along to Loder's with a picklock in one pocket and an automatic in the other. The good Bunter went with me, and if I didn't return by a certain time, had orders to telephone for the police. So you see, everything was pretty well covered. Bunter was the chauffeur who was waiting for you, Mr. Varden, but you turned suspicious. I don't blame you altogether. So all we could do was forward your luggage along to the train. On the way out, we met the Loder servants en route for New York in a car, which showed us that we were on the right track, and also that I was going to have a fairly simple job of it. You've heard all about my interview with Mr. Varden. I really don't think I could improve upon his account. When I'd seen him and his traps safely off the premises, I made for the studio. It was empty, so I opened the secret door, and as I expected, saw a line of light under the workshop door at the far end of the passage. So Loder was there all the time. Of course he was. I took the little pop gun tight in my fist and opened the door very gently. Loder was standing between the tank and the switchboard, very busy indeed. So busy he didn't hear me come in. His hands were black with graphite, a heap of which was spread on a sheet on the floor, and he was engaged with a long, springy coil of copper wire running to the output of the transformer, and the big packing case had been opened, and all the hooks were occupied. Loder, I said. He turned on me with a face like nothing human. Whimsy, he shouted. What the heck are you doing here? I have come, I said, to tell you that I know how the apple gets into the dumpling, and I showed him the automatic. He gave a great yell and dashed at the switchboard, turning out the lights so that I could not see to aim. I heard him leap at me, and then there came in the darkness a crash and a splash and a shriek such as I never heard. Not in 5 years of war, and never want to hear again. I groped forward to the switchboard. Of course, I turned on everything before I could lay my hand on the light, but I got it at last, a great white glare from the floodlight over the vat. He lay there, still twitching faintly. Cyanide, you see, is about the swiftest and painfulest thing out. Before I could move to do anything, I knew he was dead, poisoned and drowned and dead. The coils of wire that had tripped him had gone into the vat with him. Without thinking, I touched it and got a shock that pretty well staggered me. Then I realized that I must have turned on the current when I was hunting for the light. I looked into the vat again. As he fell, his hands had clutched at the wires. The coils were tight around his fingers, and the current was methodically depositing a film of copper all over his hands, which were blackened with the graphite. I'd had just sense enough to realize that Loder was dead, and that it might be a nasty sort of lookout for me if the thing came out, for I'd certainly gone along to threaten him with a pistol. I searched about till I found some solder and an iron, solder and an iron. Then I went upstairs and called in Bunter, who had done his 10 miles in record time. We went into the smoking room and soldered the arm of the cursed figure into place again as well as we could, and then we took everything back into the workshop. We cleaned off every fingerprint and removed every trace of our presence. We left the light and the switchboard as they were, and returned to New York by an extremely roundabout way. The only thing we brought away with us was the facsimile of the consular seal, and that we threw into the river. Loder was found by the butler next morning. We read in the paper how he had fallen into the vat when engaged on some experiments in electroplating. The ghastly fact was commented upon that the dead man's hands were thickly coppered over. They couldn't get it off without irreverent violence, so he was buried like that. That's all. Please, may I have my whiskey and soda now? What happened to the couch? Inquired Smith Harrington. I bought it at the sale of Loder's things, said Whimsy, and got a hold of a dear old Catholic priest I knew, to whom I told the whole story under strict vow of secrecy. He was a very sensible and feeling old bird, so one moonlight night Bunter and I carried the thing out in the car to his own little church some miles out of the city and gave it Christian burial in a corner of the graveyard. It seemed the best thing to do. And that was The Man with Copper Fingers by Dorothy L. Sayers. Now we are going to start reading Levitation by Joseph Payne Brennan. Okay. Morgan's Wonder Carnival moved into I'm going to have to hold the book differently so I can actually see Riverville for an overnight stand, setting up its tents in the big ballpark on the edge of the village. It was a warm evening in early October, and by 7 o'clock a sizable crowd had made its way to the scene of raucous amusement. The traveling show was neither large nor particularly impressive of its type, but its appearance was eagerly welcomed in Riverville, an isolated mountain community many miles from the motion picture houses, vaudeville theaters, and sports arenas situated in larger towns. The natives of Riverville did not demand sophisticated entertainment. Consequently, the inevitable fat lady, the tattooed man, and the monkey boy kept them chattering animatedly for many minutes. At the time, they crammed peanuts and buttered popcorn into their mouths, drank cup after cup of pink lemonade, and got their fingers all but stuck together, trying to escape the paper wrappers. Just to scrape the paper wrappers off colored taffy candies. Everyone appeared to be in a relaxed and tolerant state of mind when the barker for the hypnotist began his spiel. The barker, a short, stocky man wearing a checkered suit, bellowed through an improvised megaphone, while the hypnotist himself remained aloof at the rear of the plank platform erected in front of his tent. He appeared disinterested, scornful, and he scarcely deigned to glance at the gathering crowd. At length, however, when some 50 souls had assembled in front of the platform, he stepped forward into the light. A murmur went up from the crowd. In the harsh overhead electric glare, the hypnotist made a striking appearance. His tall figure, thin to the point of emaciation, his pale complexion, and most of all, his dark, sunken eyes, enormous and brilliant, compelled immediate attention. His dress, a severe black suit and an archaic black string tie, added a final Mephistophelian touch. He surveyed the crowd coolly with an expression betraying resignation and a kind of quiet contempt. His sonorous voice reached to the far edge of the throng. "I shall require one volunteer from among you," he said. "If someone will kindly step up." Everyone glanced around or nudged his neighbor, but nobody advanced toward the platform. The hypnotist shrugged. There can be no demonstration," he said in a weary voice, "unless one of you is kind enough to come up. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, the demonstration is quite harmless, quite without danger." He looked around expectantly, and presently a young man slowly elbowed through the crowd toward the platform. The hypnotist helped him up the steps and seated him in a chair. "Relax," said the hypnotist. "Presently you will be asleep, and you will do exactly as I tell you to do." The young man squirmed on the chair, grinning self-consciously toward the crowd. The hypnotist caught his attention, fixing his enormous eyes on him, and the young man stopped squirming. Suddenly, someone in the crowd threw a large ball of colored popcorn towards the platform. The popcorn arched over the lights, landing squarely atop the head of the young man, stirring in the chair. He jerked sideways, almost falling off the chair, and the crowd, quiet a moment before, guffawed boisterously. The hypnotist was furious. He turned scarlet and literally shook with rage as he glared at the crowd. "Who threw that?" he demanded in a choking voice. The crowd grew silent. The hypnotist continued to glare at them. At length, the color left his face, and he stopped trembling, but his brilliant eyes remained baleful. Finally, he nodded to the young man seated on the platform, dismissing him with brief thanks, and turning again toward the crowd. "Due to the interruption," he announced in a low voice, "it will not be necessary to recommence the demonstration with a new subject. Perhaps the person who threw the popcorn will care to come up." At last, a dozen people in the crowd turned to gaze at someone who stood half in shadow and at the rear of the gathering. The hypnotist spotted him at once. His dark eyes seemed to smolder. "Perhaps," he said in a purring, mocking voice, "the one who interrupted is afraid to come up. He prefers to hide in the shadows and throw popcorn." The culprit voiced a sudden exclamation and then pushed belligerently forward toward the platform. His appearance was not in any way remarkable. In fact, he somewhat resembled the first young man, and any casual observer would have placed the two of them in the farm labor class, neither more nor less capable than the average. The second young man sat down in the platform chair with a distinct air of defiance, and for some minutes visibly fought the hypnotist's suggestion to relax. Presently, however, his aggressiveness disappeared, and he dutifully stared into the smoldering eyes opposite his own. In about a minute or two, he arose at the hypnotist's command and lay flat on his back on the hard planks of the platform. The crowd gasped. "You will fall asleep," the hypnotist told him. "You will fall asleep. You are falling asleep. You are falling asleep. You are asleep. And you will do anything which I command you to do. Anything which I command you to do. Anything." His voice droned on, repeating repetitious phrases, and the crowd grew perfectly silent. Suddenly, a new note entered the hypnotist's voice, and the audience became tense. "Do not stand up, but rise from the platform," the hypnotist commanded. "Rise from the platform." His dark eyes became wild, and luminous looking, and the crowd shivered. Rise. And the crowd drew in its collective breath with an audible start. The young man, lying rigid on the platform, without moving a muscle, began to ascend horizontally. He arose slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but soon with a steady and unmistakable acceleration. Rise, the hypnotist's voice rang out. The young man continued to ascend until he was feet off the platform, and still he did not stop. The crowd was sure that was some kind of trick, but in spite of themselves, they stared open-mouthed. The young man appeared to be suspended and moving in midair without any possible means of physical support. Abruptly, the focus of the crowd's attention was shifted. The hypnotist clasped a hand to his chest, staggering, and crumpled to the platform. There was a call for a doctor. The barker in the checkered suit appeared out of the tent and bent over the motionless figure. We're going to have to find out what happened later. And we'll have to find out what happened to the hypnotist. But anyways, we have been reading Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous. And this is, we've been reading, we finished off The Man with Copper Fingers by Dorothy L. Sayers, and we started Levitation by Joseph Payne Brennan. So, if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all the information will be in the description below. If you want to join the Discord server, then all the information will be in the description below as well. Thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.